Okay, guys, hopefully this works. Okay, there we go. Well, now this is doing lots of fun things. Hopefully this works this time, guys. So I tried recording a couple of videos a couple weeks ago, and they all were too long. So between that and my daughter not sleeping very well, things have not gotten done the way I would have liked them to. So I apologize for that. We will try to move forward with shorter videos, and hopefully we'll be able to get everything done for you, okay? Okay. So we're going to talk today mostly about digestion. Specifically, we're going to look at the first portion is going to be mechanical digestion. So how does it move from our mouth to our stomach, and how do we empty our stomach as well? Once we hit into the other portion, which will be in the second video, we'll be looking at how do we chemically get all the things that we need to get out of our digestion. Okay. So basically, whenever we're looking at digestion in general, it's just the main purpose of it is to get all of our essential nutrients that we get in our food to every part of our body. We can't make our own food. We're not plants. We're not green. Okay. So in order for us to be able to do all those things, we need to be able to have a process in which we can get those out of our food. So the two different ways are we consider ingestion and digestion. Okay. We're mostly going to be talking about digestion, and the biggest ideas for that is going to be how does it go through our digestive tract and how we, use our gastrointestinal wall to do that, how we are able to secrete things, absorb things, eliminate things. So how do we, essentially get rid of all the stuff that we don't need from our food, and how do we regulate this whole entire process? So the first part is mechanical digestion. We're going to talk about that. And the idea here is that we're going from small, very large particles that you inhale, whenever you're eating, right? Whenever you ingest, to very minute particles that, excrete into your small intestine and large intestine, which then undergo chemical digestion. So a couple different ways that we do this, obviously, is going to be through the first part of degglutination, but especially the big part that we look at is going to be when we actually finally get to the stomach. And that's going to be what we considered our churns. They're going to basically mix with our digestive juices in order to make sure that we are able to go through our intestinal mucosa and be able to undergo chemical digestion. Okay? So that's kind of the big thing. Now, the first step of mechanical digestion is mastication. And that's just going to be how do we chew our particles? How do we chew our food? So what role does the tongue, cheeks, and lips play in that? And the idea here is that they're biting off bigger parts of our food and making them smaller. They're also giving off our saliva to start breaking down and start that chemical digestion process. Then we go to the degglutination portion. And the idea here is that this is going to be a way that they move from our back of our throat down to our stomach. Okay. And this is going to be considered, starts with the oral stage. So that's the mouth to the oropharynx. So that's a swallowing. So once we've chewed our food, we're going to swallow. That's our voluntary controlled movement. We control that. Okay. When we go to the rest of these, they're going to be involuntary movements. They're going to be movements that our body just does on their own. So the first one is going to be the pharyngeal stage. This is going to go from the orthopharynx to the esophagus. And the idea here is that this is going to be a combination of contractions, just kind of like, muscle contractions, and gravity that's going to move that food that we've just swallowed down to our esophagus. Then we go from our esophagus to our stomachs, which is the esophageal stage, and that's going to be an involuntary movement, okay? Again, same thing. We're going to have contractions and gravity that's going to push our food down, okay? Push our food down to our stomach. Okay, so that's what they're going to be talking about. Oftentimes, that amount of food that we swallow is going to be considered our bolus, okay? So that's why they say the bolus here. That's what we're talking about. That's just the food that we've ingested. Okay. And as you can see, we have, muscle contractions that allow for the food to move down. Then once we're in the esophageal stage, we also undergo certain things called peristalsis and segmentation. Okay. So what they kind of are is essentially they're more of these contractions in order to allow for the first part is basically like wave-like contractions, peristalsis. And the idea here is we're trying to break down and break off certain little parts of our food in order to be able to move it down our esophagus. Okay. Then when we go to segmentation, we're trying to make them essentially become smaller because you have this big, huge thing that you just swallowed, right? Now it's not super huge because otherwise you'd be choking, but you got this larger piece of bolus. You want to get that down to a smaller particle that can be easily digested and mixed in to make the portions that we need when we look at going into our stomach. Okay, so this is where we go into talking about how we regulate this idea, and that mostly occurs within our stomach. Obviously, it's an involuntary movement, so it's all based off of just, knowing when to happen, nerve endings, all of that jazz up until this point. Now we have a little bit of chemicals going involved here, and that's involved in our gastric juices. Okay? So this idea here is that whenever you've got this food, it finally makes it to the stomach. It's in littler particles than what we started with. What we're going to see is we're going to see this propulsion and retropulsion that essentially churns this food into making this gastric juices, and it's going to form this like chyme, what they call chyme, which is just this milky-like material. Okay, so it's just going to be considered, just going to be this milky-like layer. Okay. Now, this whole thing goes into becoming ejected about every 20 seconds into the duodenum. And this is going to be stimulated by essentially this hormone called gastric inhibitory peptide, or GIP. Okay. And essentially what it's going to do is we're going to allow for the slow passage into this. Okay. So this is what allows for this to occur. Okay, so everybody understand that. Hopefully you understand that. Okay, that's going to be considered the hormonal portion. We also have the enterogastric reflex, and that's going to be the nervous mechanism. Okay, then once we reach into our intestines, we're only going to talk about this very briefly. But the idea here is that we have this chyme that we've been put into our intestines. And now we're going to go ahead and pick up this rate. We're going to break down the stuff. We're going to break down in a chemical way and also in a little bit more of a mechanical way. And this is going to mix with the digestive juices. Now it's going to be mechanically done, is mixing with the digestive juices that you get from your pancreas, your liver, and obviously some of your intestinal lining. Okay, that's the intestinal mucosa.